Hi, welcome to another episode of the Property Management Show, a podcast brought to you by 4 and Marketing Agency for Property Managers.
On today's podcast, Marie and I will be interviewing Bob Abbott from Alarca Realty in North Carolina. He's going to talk to us about how to keep remote employees productive and accountable.
Bob used to be a big work from home skeptic, but is now a big work from home advocate. Want to know why and what tools he uses to make this remote team setup work for him and his company? Well, keep listening. So, Bob, thank you so much for being our guest today for the Property Management Show. We're so excited to be interviewing you.
Yeah, thanks. It's great to actually talk to people and see people, even though it's virtually.
Well, good video quality, right?
I'm sorry?
We have good video quality.
We're not absolutely. Absolutely.
Back in the day back in the olden days with the flip phones.
So to start things off, Bob, since it's your first time being our guest here, can you please introduce yourself and, Alarca and what you do?
Sure. My name is Bob Abbott. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, or just north of Charlotte in Mooresville. Alarca Realty is the name of our company. We've been in business since 2005 and got into business really to start flipping houses, but then started property management. And thank goodness we were in that realm when the last big economic impact hit. And so we've been focused on property management really since about 2010.
That's great. And so the main reason that we asked you to be our guest today is you operate a very unique type of property management company wherein you're basically remote, not just you, but your entire team is remote. And so given that during these current times, a lot of property managers are kind of either forced to be remote, are looking to be more remote. Can you tell us kind of like how you started transitioning from being a typical brick and mortar business to a more remote? It can't just be like overnight, right?
Right. No, it was definitely baby steps. And so that's a great way to do things. I listened to people talk about it at conferences and talked to people about it for probably 3 years before I even started doing anything. And we started by using another firm, a specialized VA company. So we started with Planet Synergy, and they were handling just some of our invoicing and things like that. And then we also moved to, about the same time, the folks over at Virtually Incredible to help us with applications. And, working with them and seeing that this thing could actually work using remote folks. About 4 months after starting with them, I actually went out and hired my own directly to help us with other tasks.
So you transitioned away from the third party and brought everybody in-house.
That's how at first it was a combination of both. So I still had I was still using the other folks. I hired a guy named RJ from the Philippines just to help with some other marketing and things that the other folks weren't handling. And then over a period of time, just started adding more and more to that VA world and got more and more out of the local folks. So as people would leave the company either under their own free will or under my free will, they ended up being replaced with our remote assistants, so we call them remote team members, and it just kind of grew from there.
So just to give people a kind of a better idea of the circumstances when you made the decision, how big was the company before you started transitioning to like more and more remote work being done? And kind of like, I'm trying to think, like, was the size in any way factored into making that decision, or was it plainly cost?
It really was, cost was certainly a factor, but it was more about keeping my local team, my core team happy, right? So if you think about all of us have things during the day that we just don't like to do. that we have to do as part of our job. And so I went to the team. I said, well, if I could take something off your plate, what would you like to go away and have someone else do? And they're like, oh, well, this. I'm like, okay, well, then I went out and I advertised for that job. I said, well, let's find someone who would like doing that, and make it a win-win, right? Because then it wins for the VA, it wins for the employee because their job's better, and it wins for me because we're saving the company some money or making the team more productive. But we were, at that time, that was 2014, we were about 180 properties, and I had three full-time employees. So I had a receptionist, a bookkeeper, and a PM, plus myself.
Were there any, so you mentioned that you would talk to your full-time employee or local employee and say, hey, what can and I love how like you have those terms. You said, what can I take off your plate that would make your life easier? Are there any specific tasks that you've identified that need to be done by a local person? I'm sure there are at least some.
Yeah. So it's real simple for me. If they have to set foot on the property, it's got to be done locally. Anything else can be done remotely.
That's great.
And so, right now, in fact, I have a separate maintenance company. So right now my maintenance company handles that function for us. So I don't have someone locally other than me that goes around and looks at the property and does those things. We hire our maintenance company to handle that piece of it.
Yeah, that's really cool.
And so I'm really curious, given that now you've completed that like transition, right? And now, you guys are completely remote. How big are you now in terms of doors?
So, yeah, so we went up to about 250 properties at the end of 2018. And then as I kind of hit my 55th birthday, really started to analyze life. And I've got a 10-year-old son or 11-year-old son now. And really wanted a work-life balance. And so we focused on keeping our happy clients and actually culling the clients that weren't happy or that weren't making us happy. Because it's just, life's too short at this point. When I first started, we took anything and anyone that would come and sign up with us. And I think a lot of PMs have gone through that same transition. But in a nutshell, what that means right now, we're about 150. The upside of that is, in the summertime, I work between 2 and 4 hours a day. I spend the rest of the time with my kid.
That's great.
Wow, that's amazing. That sounds like the dream.
Yeah,
right?
It's sometimes it's too much work. I'm still aiming for Tim Ferriss's 4-hour work week. I think I can get there, but then, like I said, I've got the maintenance company, so I still spend time there, and then some other projects going on. But.
Yeah. So I'm curious, and this might be a little bit off topic, but you did mention that one of the things that allows you to do this is kind of tightening your client profile, the clients that you want to work with. Was that all at once or was it over time? Because like you said, a lot of companies are going through that change right now to essentially make their life better and their employees happier too, make more money, all of these things. What was your process, just like briefly?
Yeah, so it was a concerted effort at the end of 2018 to cull the herd and just focus on the people that we really thought aligned with our vision for managing properties, right? So, one of the things, if they didn't want to do any maintenance on the property, then they made the list, right? If they were always unhappy, we've got those clients that anytime you talk to them, they're yelling, they're screaming, they're swearing. Like anyone who was swearing on my team, they got
pass.
Yeah. Out, right? We're move on. And so, there was a little bit of a financial hit there. But at the end of the day, it more than works out when you figure out how much extra time you spend with those people and how much more productive you can be and how much happier you can be. Right? And I know some of that's going to sound very Steve Welty-ish, and I probably get some of that, or I certainly get some of that from Steve, and that helped me make some of those decisions. But yeah, I mean, being happy is important.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah,
important
definitely.
when those are the people you work with all the time, you hear from all the time, no matter if you know you're right or wrong, it still doesn't feel good to have somebody contact you constantly angry. So why deal with it?
Right.
I love
And, we used to, I used to view this as a contest, right? You had to win. Every
Mhm.
conversation I had to win, do you want a treat for ants? Who should pay for that? I had to win those conversations. And I've made the shift to say, you know what, we can all be happy here. I don't need to win every little battle.
Mhm.
It's not worth it. Some people would say I've gotten weaker as I've gotten older.
it.
Perhaps happier for sure.
That's great. And so to go back to like the working remote, so you started with kind of a hybrid between having a team that's local. I'm assuming local, but you guys still were working in an office, or were they also
Right.
remote?
No, I still had an office until the about the fourth quarter of 2018. We still had an
That's
office
great.
until then.
So you had that hybrid of like local team in an office, some like remote team members through a third party provider, and then some kind of like Alarca sourced virtual assistants or remote team. So when did you decide to bring all the remote team members in house rather than use a third party service? And sort of like, was it gradual or was it like one key moment?
Yeah, it was probably it was about 6 months in after I hired my first VA RJ, right? Because it's kind of a proof of concept. And
Mhm.
can I make this work? Can I really hire someone? Can I manage them? How much work is involved? Um, and will it work? And then you do have the economic piece too, right? Obviously, if you're
Mhm.
paying them yourself, you're getting better a lower price because you're absorbing all the management, the payroll, and all those types of tasks as well as the hiring. So there's definitely a trade-off there. It doesn't work for everyone. I am kind of a control freak, so that certainly plays into that. Um, and we had enough checklists and process in place where we could do it. That's the key that I think a lot of folks miss out on. When I talk to people that say they've hired VAs and they don't work, it's because they don't have the right checklist or process in place. Right.
And you
Or
did all
they've
that
hired a
work,
bad VA. There's bad VAs just like they're bad local employees, right?
right?
It's no different.
So you mapped out the, I mean, were they workflows? Were they checklists and workflows? Did you map out everything prior to hiring your first VA, or did you do it while you were working through the process with him?
Yeah, I thought I had it mapped out prior to hiring him. And then you realize it's the basic, right? Like, how do you log into Propertyware, or how do you get to 4.5's website? I mean, right? It's like you have to be very, very specific
Mm.
um, in with those things because you're not right over their shoulder looking at them. So we used a tool back in the day called Screencast-O-Matic, where
Mhm.
I would do something once and I'd film myself doing it and have the screen on there, and that was great, right? So I did it one time. We put
Mhm.
it in the checklist and we had the link to the video, and then every VA is able to go back and look at that. They can pause it as they're going through there. It just seemed to really work well.
I have a question about that. It's so interesting because we always try, like Marie's the queen of screen recordings. Anytime she has to teach somebody, she'll do a screen recording and I'm like, "Yes, I don't have to do it. I can just use this." But something we encounter is software's changing. Does that happen
Mhm.
to you a lot where you have to do you re-record it, or do you just change the instructions, and how often do you encounter that?
Now that is a problem, and I can tell you right now, if I go audit a checklist, I'm going to find where one didn't get updated for the latest and greatest.
But
So
they're
it's
still figuring it out because it's one small thing.
It's an ongoing process, right?
Yeah.
So as you grow, and you have people using the checklist, you have to rely on them to update the checklist. And
Yeah.
sometimes they don't, they get caught up in their day to day. So we use, in our market, it's slow in November and December. So we shut down every Wednesday and we have process improvement days. And so that's when, for those 2 months, they're really focused on updating those things.
That's fantastic.
But, it's also part of our quarterly rocks in EOS is that they're doing that as well.
Yeah. That's really good. Yeah, one of the things we have workflows and checklists obviously too that are always updating, and something that we've been doing recently that I've absolutely loved is in Google Sheets. If somebody sees something that doesn't really make sense, they can just make a comment and tag you in the comment and say, hey, this doesn't really sound right. So it's made updating our procedures and processes so much easier because I just have an email at the top of my inbox saying, hey, this doesn't seem right. And I'm like, you're right. I'll just change it real quick.
Yeah.
But I love the idea of having the dedicated day to go through those and make sure they're up to date, because I think it just makes everybody's life easier. And obviously training somebody that's not right
Well, and
next to you.
it takes it out of instead of making it an interruption to their day-to-day work to fix the checklist, they know like today is the day dedicated for fixing the checklist. Yeah. I'm not answering the phones. I'm not answering emails.
And then you make sure you do it right instead of just picking one piece of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because to do these things right, I can't remember whose presentation I was at a couple months ago, in Process Street for just utilities. He had 104 or 140 steps in his checklist to turn on utilities, right? So they can get very detailed and very lengthy, and to make them really on point and have conditional logic and all those things.
Yeah.
So speaking of like process improvement days, right? So like right now it's like you're normal, but let's walk back to when you were just starting out, and you realized that the workflows and checklists that you thought you had figured out were actually not sufficient, to train a remote team because it wasn't detailed enough. It didn't include the basics, so on and so forth. And so how did you instill this kind of like self-accountability of, well, you guys own this process? Because it doesn't sound like you yourself sit down on a Wednesday, look at all these processes and change them all yourself for 2 months. It sounds like they're doing it. So how did you get from, oh no, I don't have sufficient processes and checklists to, oh, now they know to do that on Wednesdays in this low season?
Yeah, so it starts at the top, right? So if you, at first, they'd come to me and ask the question, and I'd, being the good boss, I'd answer it, right? And be like, yep, this is what you do, which trains them just to keep coming back to me and asking me more and more questions. So I learned over time to ask them, instead, tell me what the checklist says, right? Tell me why you think the checklist isn't correct, and then give me your suggestions for the change, which just in and of its nature minimizes the number of times they come back to me, because human nature is half the time it's in the checklist. And I found out they just wanted to doubly, triply make sure that they weren't going to be on top secret probation if they followed the checklist, but it wasn't what I wanted, right? So, yeah, you have to instill the confidence in them that the checklist is right and that they need to do the work to tell you, make the change themselves. As long as you're answering the questions, you're going to keep getting the questions.
Well, I feel like that's really important too, because if somebody is always coming to you and asking a question, you might have a slightly different answer from day to day. So that could also be confusing for them, if it's taken out of context, where you probably see it a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, so those are great examples. Just yesterday in our daily huddle, we had utilities automatically switch to our name. because a tenant had them shut off 10 days prior to the end of their lease. And I said, well, why did we do that? I don't want to pay electricity for 10 days. They know I don't mind paying it for 3 days. And so it became clear that they didn't know what was the right number of days, right? So the process had to be updated to say, all right, at 5 days, if it's more than 5 days, you need to get your manager's approval to let it switch over. So it's always evolving.
Makes sense.
And so you mentioned that you have a daily huddle. So it's sounding to me like, you've put in place a lot of different touch points to make sure that not only is your team constantly updating with checklists and workflows, but you check in with them every day. So just to give our audience members an idea of what these huddles look like and kind of like what they do for the team, walk us through how that goes.
Sure. Well, I mean, if you've got a traditional office, you can picture it, right? You show up in the morning and people are grabbing their cup of coffee or what, and they're, what's going on today? And you just intrinsically kind of know what's happening. So the daily huddle is just a 15-minute, hopefully, sometimes they go a little longer, but we shoot for 10 to 15 minutes on just the red flags for the day. So we keep a Google sheet of our red flags list so nothing slips through the cracks. So we open up the Google sheet in our Hangout, which is on Google Hangouts or Google Meet. So we get to see each other face to face like this as well. And just to cover what's going on today. And then, so the whole team's aware, what red flags do we have? And then I usually spend hopefully no time, but sometimes up to 30 minutes afterwards with a smaller group. So if someone's got a specific question, I'm not going to keep the whole team in that meeting to go over a specific maintenance request or something like that. But you want to train the team, because I found without those huddles, even though you've got all the process and checklists in place, they forget the kind of the why, or they might lose like, well, what is the purpose here, right? Like I don't have a checklist on be happy, right? So that's part of my huddle, is right, like let's be happy today. Who did you make happy yesterday? Who do you think you can make happy today, right? It's that kind of stuff.
I love that. That kind of brought me to a question I was thinking about earlier. When you are working remotely, how do you maintain positive morale with the team? So that daily huddle is probably a great way. Be happy. Do you have any other things that you do to kind of connect the team together?
Yeah, so we've got, and I'm a rookie at this compared to some of the folks that are out there. But we use Slack, extensively. We've got a random channel in Slack where people just go out and post random photos of what they've been doing on the weekend or random jokes or whatever, right? So they understand that. I am trying to be fairly consistent in my praise and thanks to everyone, right? Knowing that they can't see my face, all the time. So when things come across Slack, I'm always giving the thumbs up or the heart or, all the little things we do. And just reminding folks how important they are and those things. So I'm not doing the trips to Mexico like some folks are, where they meet the whole team face to face. I have team in the Philippines and Mexico, so it'd be a little bit hard.
Just a little bit.
It is on my list, though. I'm looking forward to certainly getting to the Philippines. There's a great wake park there. So
I highly recommend it.
I want to go.
After this pandemic is over, we should have a big outing.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, look, it's really good to hear that you guys have found sort of what works for you, right? Because like you mentioned, it really depends on the team, kind of what tools and kind of things would keep up the team morale. So how did you end up, using the like Slack and creating that random channel? Did you learn that from somewhere? Was it trial and error?
Yeah, so listening to a lot of folks on these types of podcasts, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you do? Then you go look at them, you check them out. talk to other folks that have VAs. I actually, 2 years ago, went to a remote work conference in Bali for a week. And it was all not property managers. It was all remote work companies. Slack was there. There were some
That
very
sounds
large
magical. I want to
companies.
go to a conference in Bali.
It was awesome. I highly recommend it. But I learned a ton there from what people in all industries are doing. And so, you kind of pick and choose. And I tried a bunch of things out, and then they don't work. And so you get rid of them. And, it's
On to the next.
yeah, you have to. And then actually, I asked my VAs too. When I first got into this, I said, well, what'd you use at your last company? Because almost every VA you hire now is going to have already been, working for someone else. Or you can certainly find them. And when I first started, they had all worked for other property management companies, be it in Australia, Europe, or here. So they're a good resource.
So what would you say are so obviously we talked a lot about the pros, right, of having a remote team for your property management company. Can you share some of the cons, if there are any?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to really point to a downside, particularly in this environment, right? My business has not missed a beat. Like there was no change from pre-COVID to now. We're doing the same things that we did then. So in this environment, it's been fantastic. It just takes time. You have to have the right personality. If you don't have things documented, right, it's going to be very hard for you to make this work. And obviously they can't go to the house, right? So you really have to work on if you've got a VA talking to your client about their property, how can they convey that level of knowledge about the house if they've never been there? So you have to be able to use photos and videos and those types of things.
When would you say a property management company is ready to sort of take the plunge and start transitioning work from in an office to remote?
So I think it's essentially when, so if you go back to the beginning, if the owner has stuff on his or her plate that they don't want to be doing, that's just ripe to get to a VA, right? Whatever that is, right? So, we didn't go into the specific tasks, but, we can get into some of the things that I don't even deal with now, right? Because a VA does that. Or your team is at a point where they're overwhelmed and that your $25 an hour property manager, for example, is spending half her day on $8 an hour tasks. Well, then get the $8 stuff off her plate and optimize your folks, right? And you can do that particularly through the folks that outsource, because it doesn't need to be a full-time job, right? If you had 20 hours of work a week that you could outsource through invoicing to Planet Synergy, then that's a great way to start. It gets it off your plate. They take care of it, and you don't need to worry about hiring someone or, how do I keep them busy 40 hours a week? And then there's stuff that they're just better at, the folks that do the video processing, they've got a system in place to edit the videos and get them posted to YouTube. They're just better at it than you anyway. And for 20 or 25 bucks a video, you just outsource and let them do it. I know a couple guys who just love going to the office, right?
Yeah.
They don't, and they don't like going to the office to be alone, right?
Yep.
They like to go to the office. They like to see their team. They like to have their tenants come in and pay the rent. My buddy Warren down in Charleston, right? He's got the refrigerator there, and the tenants can get a free Coke when they pay their rent. So that's not going to work for him, right? Yeah. There are tasks he can certainly outsource, but he's never going to go full remote.
Did you experience any kind of pushback or kind of like difficulty getting residents and owners to accept that you now don't really have like a physical office where they could just like walk into and grab a Coke?
Right. So it was another baby step, right?
Uh-huh.
It's just because of my situation here. Our main office is in Charlotte. I live 35 miles north in Mooresville, and that could be an hour or an hour and a half drive during the week, and I got tired of that. And
Mhm.
I said, well, we're just going to move our office to Mooresville. Well, my staff was like, what? How are you going to do that? How are the tenants going to pay rent? How are they going to do this? I'm like, we'll figure it out. And if they want to drive up to Mooresville to still see us in person, they can. Well, guess what? After about 3 months, nobody wanted to drive the hour and a half to come see us anymore. And they figured out how to pay rent online and how to mail us keys or put keys in lock boxes. And so out of necessity, just like right now, they're not coming to your office. Like right now is the best time to make that switch because
Yep.
they can't come to your office even if they wanted to, right? Or for many of us. So it's certainly a proof of concept for your business and how it might work. And so once we got to that point, and we said, all right, now do we even really need it? We still have office locations, but we don't have people showing up there every day. But it's a shared workspace, so those are receptionists in the building. So if someone wants to drop off a key, they can. We use a separate mail service. So we've got a separate mailing address. So all the mail gets sent there. It's automatically opened and scanned. So I don't have to, go and pick up mail and then scan it into a system and mail it to the VA. The VA handles all the mail and those types of things.
Oh, that's cool. So the system, whatever source you're using, they open the mail, they scan it, they send it.
Yeah, it's actually
Email or
cool. They
whatever.
scan the envelopes first, and then you tell
Oh,
them, like every day you can log in and you tell them, well, that's junk mail, just get rid of it. Or I know
Uh-huh.
what that is, I don't need it, get rid of that. Okay, these I want to see, go ahead and open them and scan them. And then
that's cool.
That's
yeah,
cool. You
it's
save on a
awesome.
lot of paper cuts.
It's the
Oh
best.
my gosh.
I I I like it so much. I'm the caretaker for my mom. She's in a nursing home nearby. I did that with her mail. So I got tired of having it come here and dealing with it. So it goes to her own virtual mailbox
Maybe
now, and
I
they
should do
open
that
and
with
scan.
my mail.
It's awesome. It's if you travel,
Uh-huh.
because I can go anywhere, my mail's gonna be fine.
Yeah.
Really cool.
I've never even, I
They
mean,
never
I'm sure
stack
it's a
up
common
too.
thing. I've never heard of it before, though. That's really cool.
Do you mind sharing like what that service is? Now I'm really curious.
It's just called Anytime Mailbox, and there's a
Anytime.
number of them out there, but that's who I use. And it goes through a local, like one of mine is just a local postnet that
Mm.
it's sourced through Anytime Mailbox, but it's the postnet office. So if you have to pick something up, you can, or they'll forward it to your house.
Yeah. I like it.
Super cool.
Yeah, definitely a great tool to have. And so talking about, to kind of go back a little bit, you mentioned that kind of one of the cons of having a remote team, especially an offshore remote team, is there are certain things that would take them longer to do because like they don't have as fast of an internet connection as we do here in the US. And so given that you have to factor that in, how do you know when they're actually productive? Like they're actually like working and productive. It's just like, oh, it's their internet versus, oh, they're kind of slacking off. Like how do you
Right.
ensure that they're accountable for the work and that you know that they're productive instead of just like taking it easy?
Yeah.
Right. So that's a great point. I should have brought up. It wasn't that long ago.
Mm-hmm.
I swore to people, anyone who would talk to me and listen to me, I said I would never be a work from home company. This was not that long ago. I was like, I'm not doing it because people aren't going to work, right? They're going to screw off all day,
I wish we had that on video.
right? Right. I'm not doing it. So you have to trust people, obviously. I mean, look, you guys know with people you've worked with, I'm sure no one at 4.5 is a slacker, but at your previous companies, you know the people you suspected weren't pulling their weight, right? We all know who those folks are. The great thing for me as the control freak, right, with VAs is we have them record all their time on a tool called Time Doctor. And this, again, came to me from other VAs. It's a ubiquitous program that everyone uses out there. So it automatically takes a screenshot every 9 minutes of what they're doing, and they have to record on that screenshot what they're working on. So it just pops up on their screen, shows the screenshot, and they have to you can have projects or tasks, and they can pick those and tell you what they are. It also records all the keystrokes and the mouse movements. So I can go on and look at Time Doctor right now, and it'll tell me, I'm just going to make up a name, Mary. Say Mary is 20% unproductive today. And it'll show me shots of all her screenshots where she hasn't moved the mouse or hasn't hit the keyboard.
Mm-hmm.
So you can just verify your suspicion, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't use that to just monitor them and say, oh, you looked at YouTube for 10 seconds, or, you looked at the news, you're out, right? That's
like you
not
still
what
want them taking breaks because
right.
that leads to better
That's
productivity.
not what it's about.
Yeah.
However, we have caught folks who, again, we suspected weren't being very productive, who on their 9-minute screenshot was a picture of their keystroke generator. So there's programs they can buy to actually simulate keystrokes, right?
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
So there's always a workaround, right? And then my attitude there is if someone's not busy, I'm not giving them enough work. So we sit down, we talk, all right, let me give you some more work, or let me cut your hours back, right? I don't want you sitting here bored.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting too. I can imagine if, let's say, John just said, like, hey guys, we're implementing this Time Doctor thing. I'm going to track all your keystrokes. I mean, if it came out of the blue, I'd feel like, wait, why? Like, right?
Yeah,
I
so
kind of feel like,
with remote work, it's very, very common. So a lot of them are used to it. And even locally here for people in the programming world, right? If you're a contractor company who does work for a number of different clients, they use that to show the client that they've actually been working the hours that they're billing for.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not uncommon in those worlds, but I understand, right? We're not, again, back when I had an office, it was my computers. I had the software installed. The SpectreSoft going back years was on there, and it would track all that stuff, right?
So right now you don't have any more team members who are US based, right? Like I think we talked about that before.
Right. Not in the management company, just in the maintenance company.
Okay.
Right. If I could hire remote workers to come here and do maintenance for a month and then fly them back, I would be all over that.
And you mentioned,
I'm sure they'll love that.
Yeah, I know they would. They totally would. You mentioned, a couple minutes ago that you can't really have somebody talk about a property if they haven't been in it, but then you bring in pictures, videos, things like that. So are you having your remote workers in Mexico or the Philippines talk to property owners, to tenants? What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, yes to both. I don't talk to anyone unless it's something that gets through the chain, right? Something that can't be handled by the team. So absolutely. We've got one person on our team, her whole entire job description is client service rep, and her whole job is just to talk to our clients. So she's not in charge of work orders. She's not in charge of marketing. She's just in charge of talking to the client and making sure they know what's going on with their property, and they are informed and they feel like she's there looking out for them because that's her job.
Yeah.
So her job description is pretend you're the client, All right. So if someone comes back and says, hey, we need a new garbage disposal in this house and it's going to be $450, she's going to push back and say, whoa, 450, what, so she's being the owner in that interaction. And then she's able to go back to the client and then tell them, all right, this is what we did. This is why we did it.
That's great. So you're able to do that because you're hiring very specifically. And that even makes me think of, you said her job description says, pretend like you're the client. We talked about checklists, but we didn't really talk about job descriptions. And it sounds like you've thought that out really well.
Trial and error again, and copying other people, right? But you hit on a point there. When I first, one of my second VA hires was a bookkeeper, and I had a local bookkeeper, and she left, and I essentially looked at it and said, well, gosh, for what I was paying her, I could hire about 6 remote workers. And I can only think of a way to really split her job into 2 or 3. So it sounds like a savings, and I'll actually probably get better work because I'll have a specialist in those, each of those 2 or 3 things. So that's what we did. And we started splitting the work up and getting specialists. We did at one point swing too far, and we had too many specialists, and then the communication back and forth, it's just like, whoa, this has gone way overboard. Now I have people in-house fighting with people. I'm like, wait, I'm paying both of you and nothing's getting done. So you have to be careful. There's definitely a balance there. But the job descriptions, the interviewing, they have to fit with it. Culture is every bit as important remote as it is local, right?
Yeah, so it's interesting that you bring up culture because I think a lot of people who are thinking of moving remote work to a remote location think of those team members not as team members. They're more of like VAs. Oh, they're assistants, right? I just like push work to them. But for your situation, it's different because they're actually your team, right? So what does it look like to create a culture where almost no 2 people are in the same place at the same time? How does that work?
Yeah. So again, I've evolved. Right? I used to say, I don't care about culture. I'm all remote. Right. And, which someone wiser than me pointed out, well, that is my culture. Right. I still have a culture. So yeah, we looked at improving that to, again, we want people to be happy. They're not just showing up to work. And you have to work on those things through the huddles, through all your communications, through your documents, through your checklists, right? It's got to permeate everything you do because they're not going to accidentally pick up on how I'm speaking with the client on the phone, right? They're not going to hear that. So when COVID first started, we sent out a bulk email to all of our tenants and letting them know we were here to help them and those types of things. And if they needed help or they were struggling to reach out to us, and we'd give them a call. So my team was nervous about calling the tenants in that situation. They didn't know, all right, how are we going to handle this? So I called the first 4 tenants. I recorded the calls on Loom, right, while I was talking on the phone. And then I just sent those to my team members. I said, all right, here's 4 different examples, 4 different scenarios that they ended up were all different. So it worked out well. But then sent that to the team and said, all right, here's 4 examples of how you can handle this. Right. So there are ways to do that.
I love that.
Marie and I both love it. I think we were just like, I both love it. Well, I was going to say, I really like it because I think that oftentimes when you're teaching people, you're teaching them one instance, and that goes back to the checklists and how the checklists can sometimes be hard because there might be outliers, or I don't know if that's the right term, but just one-off cases. So providing the multiple examples in this instance was probably super, super helpful. And that actually gives me a couple ideas for training. So I really like that.
And it also goes to where I'm not very good is on the employee onboarding. And so that's one of my rocks for this quarter is to get that, really have that first 30 days lined out where they're reading the corporate manual. Nick Cook out of Portland did a fantastic job on his manual and really outlines the culture, and he's got quizzes in there and links to different videos and YouTube videos and articles and those things. So in that, like, for example, I can take these Loom videos I just made of these phone calls and make that part of that onboarding. So, all right, here's, how one way to interact with the tenants that's acceptable. Right?
Absolutely.
So I like that because it's a one and done. Right. I get very frustrated when I have to answer the same question 7 times, even if it's with 7 different people. Like, all right, let me document it, go look at the video or go look at the checklist and then come back to me.
Yeah, I feel ya. I even get more frustrated when it's the 7th time and I'm like, why didn't I document this before?
Right, exactly. We've all been there. You get caught up in the day-to-day and you're like, all right, I'm just going to answer it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious now that it seems like you have a lot of good systems in place. You've mentioned a lot of tools that you use to not just train your team, but keep them productive and also kind of instill that culture, not just, introduce them to the culture, but instill and keep, reinforcing that same culture with them. But what does your day-to-day look like, Bob, now that you've transitioned and you have systems working? I'm guessing it doesn't look the same as it did when you started this.
No,
So just give us
not
an
at
idea.
all. Yeah, it's like everyone, right? When you start, you're the 12, 14-hour days, 6 or 7 days a week. So it's dramatically different. I am on the huddles every day. I did, when I had local staff, I stepped out of those, and I found even though I had local staff, you just lose, you lose some of the message. Like you log in 6 months later and you're like, what happened? Wait a minute. That's not how we do that. So I still like to keep my finger on the pulse through the huddles. So those, I've got one with the maintenance company at 9, with Alarca at 9:15. So normally 9 to 9:30 or 10 is spent on the huddles, just making sure we know what's going on for the day. And then, obviously I can work a lot of hours if I want. There's always something, I have a long to-do list. But on average, it's 4 to 6 hours a day between the 2 companies, 5 days a week. There are some things I still handle just because of the money, particularly the money aspect, right? So, my VAs do have credit cards. So they can buy things through the company and pay bills, and they've got access to bill pay. So vendors can be paid and things like that. So you have to keep an eye on those things and make sure you've got good process there. In particular, I still handle the ultimate owner draws. I have outsourced that in the past and it worked great. I definitely will outsource that again. Or, have, when I say outsource, I mean someone else on the team will do that. But most of my time now is spent managing. It's the troubleshooting, right? So we'll get the emails back. We use a tool called Help Scout. So we have a centralized inbox for tenants, a centralized inbox for clients, because particularly when you're remote, you need access to those conversations, right? If someone calls out sick, like, well, Marie was out today and, Joe called and he really wanted to talk to Marie and I have no idea what was going on. But with Help Scout, I can see all the previous emails with Marie, right? And so we can still answer those things. And I can monitor those to see, are they being answered in an appropriate timeline? So I'm looking at Help Scout, once a day. I get a summary email every morning. So I'm able to look at that. And then it's process improvement stuff, more, business development, process improvement.
Well, that's actually what I was going to ask. So are you doing business development? Are you talking to prospective owners?
I am right now. We're actually right now interviewing. The job posts are out there for our BDM. So
Nice.
that's our next hire.
Cool.
And then after that, I'll probably have a onboarding specialist or an assistant to the BDM, one or the other.
Hopefully that can take you to 4-hour days consistently.
Yeah, I'm still a few years off. Like I said, I've got between the maintenance company too. I mean, I could easily spend, 8 hours a day there, right? So it's because we're doing work for other property management firms in the area as well. So there's a lot going on there.
Well, it seems like it's working for you. I love it.
Yeah, and I've got VAs. Well, I've got remote team. Well, believe it or not, at the maintenance company, right? So anyone who's not working on the house at the maintenance company is in the Mexico or in the Mexico, in the Philippines or in the Philippines or Mexico.
Yeah, that's interesting. And also, I was surprised when you mentioned that your VAs have access to like money in the company, right? Like the credit cards, they can pay vendors, because I can imagine most people are already cautious when it comes to bringing work remotely because of productivity issues. Like you don't really know if they're really productive, but then with the money aspect, it's more scary. And as you mentioned, you're a control freak. And so do you mind briefly sharing? I assume you didn't do that day one, but what like you decide that was like a good thing to transition to?
Yeah, so absolutely did not do that day one. I'm fortunate enough to have two folks with me that have been with the company for over 3 years on the bookkeeping side. So they had earned my trust, and they're able to, like I said, pay the bills. So all the utility bills are all handled remotely. They're all paid via credit card. The bank accounts being reconciled every day by my remote team, by my bookkeepers. So yeah, it hasn't been a problem. I still keep my I'm still involved enough that it's not an issue. And just by its very nature, a lot of the opportunity for fraud has disappeared because I don't have paper checks, right? So there's no way I can have a bookkeeper in my office write a paper check to themselves or write it to cash and then book it in our system as to a vendor, right? That can't happen. They can't steal checks. I don't have tenants paying rent in cash or with money orders, so they can't do any of the tricks there. Mm-hmm. So there's really not a lot of opportunity there. They could, in theory, make up a fake vendor. I don't want to give them ideas. So I mean, I've thought about it. I know how they could do it. we don't need to go down there.
But the risk is low. The risk is a lot lower than it would have been a long time.
Well, yeah, they've got to have opportunity. They've got to have a reason to do it. And, the first time a credit card charge shows up in Manila, I'm kind of going to know, right? Like, wait a minute, we're not buying anything in Manila.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And so it sounds like, between your processes, so obviously you are implementing EOS. So there's like, accountability, like everybody knows what their rocks are. So I think that kind of plays into you being able to keep a pulse on the company, right? Because you have EOS. And then you have incorporated process improvement days during the slow season every Wednesdays. You have a daily huddle. You use tools like Slack, Google Hangouts, Anytime Mailbox, Time Doctor, also Help Scout,
Loom.
to basically keep this whole culture of like, hey, we're all a team, even if we're apart. We pick up each other's slack if someone's sick or whatever. Apart from those, are there any other things or tools that you use that you feel like our listeners could find value in if they do decide to take the plunge?
Yeah, so you've got to have a good checklist system. So we use Process Street. But any of those, as long as you're familiar with them, your team knows how to use them, that's imperative. I think Help Scout's been fantastic. You have to have some type of remote showing service, whether it's Showing Hero, Tenant Turner, Rently, whatever you're going to use there. We use Tenant Turner, love them. We use Traction Tools to help manage the EOS process, so that whole EOS can get unwieldy if you're not careful, but Traction Tools keeps them online with that. They can see their weekly to-dos, they get reminders, their quarterly rocks, all that stuff's in there for them. Super slick tool. And trying to think what else. Oh, you gotta use Time Doctor. I use TransferWise to actually pay them, which is just an upload from Time Doctor. We used to use PayPal. TransferWise is a little easier. And then you've got to use your online banking, whatever bank you have, you've got to pay bills electronically. You've got to have remote deposit. Because even though we don't accept checks, we still get them once in a while. And so then I'm having to deposit those through the remote deposit. Although Anytime Mailbox will also deposit checks for you.
Oh, that's cool.
For a fee.
Oh, that's cool.
And then we use a fairly large percentage of our tenants pay their rent in cash at Walmart.
Huh.
So we use a program called Rent Money. There's Pay Near Me. There's a number of those out there. But allow your tenants to go pay their rent in cash somewhere, so you don't have to deal with it. It automatically shows up in the software, and you never have to worry about someone stealing your cash or making the deposit. I used to hate going to the bank with the big wad of cash and did I get the deposit slip right? I haven't done that in years and years and years.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of really good information about the different tools that you use to make it work. And I think it's really smart. Instead of telling tenants, yeah, you can't pay with cash, sorry, just give them an option. Like you said, right? Like, you don't have to win every battle. Sometimes, okay, well, what will make you happy and make me happy? Like, of course, if they say, I want to give you cash for rent, they still want to pay rent. They just find a way rather than, nope, got to have a checkbook. Nope, got to have whatever. Like, you have to figure out the online system, even if you don't like it.
Right.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah. I feel like the overall message that I got from this was if you want to be successful, I mean, a lot of the things that you've said are super helpful, but I feel like the main underlying message is you treat your remote team members like they're part of your team. They're not any different just because they're in a different state or in a different country or in a different hemisphere or whatever.
Right. And we've all discovered that now, right? You all working from home. Doesn't matter if you're in San Francisco or if you're in the Philippines or if you're in Australia, right? As long as you're there, you're on the screen, you're getting the work done. And then just start small. Take the baby steps, take small bites, and that's you build your comfort, or you'll find out it doesn't work for you.
Yeah.
Right? But even some of the folks that I can think of that it just failed originally, they've gone back to the well and it's working now, because at some point the economics do get pretty compelling.
Yeah. And it's trial and error, like you said.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, I don't have any other questions. Is there any last piece of big takeaway that you want to leave listeners with, like the big aha moment or anything that you think is really worth sharing? I mean, we've covered so much.
Yeah.
I feel like the last thing you said, baby steps, is like a really important message too.
Baby steps. And then one of my favorite messages from Tim Ferriss was, think about the worst thing that can happen, right? If you hire a virtual assistant or a remote team member, and what's draw out, all right, well, if I do this and it fails, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? And if you're going to live through that and it's not going to be catastrophic, then go ahead and try it and see what happens.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm sure that everybody listening absolutely loved this and has a lot of takeaways. I know I do. I'm sure, Marie, you do too. There are a lot of things I learned, softwares we might even look into, strategies that I might try to implement. So thank you.
Yeah, and I'm always here to help folks too. So if people have questions, feel free to email me. I don't know if you guys put my email out there or how that works, but
we can put it on screen and in the write-up.
Yeah. Okay, there you go. And then, and
Awesome.
I'll do my best to get back to you.
Awesome.
Thank
you so much.
Well, thank you all, and be safe, and
Yes.
find ways to have fun and be happy.
I love that. Be happy.